Sarah Chen had always believed that the most dangerous thing on Kepler 186f was the weather. The plasma storms that swept across the rocky plains could melt through protective shields and turn the strongest metals into puddles of gleaming liquid. But on this particular evening, as she watched the emergency alerts flash across her tablet screen, she realized she'd been wrong. The colony's warning sirens pierced the artificial twilight, their wail mixing with the low rumble of approaching thunder. Through the reinforced windows of her family's research station, Sarah could see the characteristic green tinge to the clouds that signaled a plasma storm's approach. But it was the other warning that made her heart race. Unknown biological signature detected in Sector 7. All civilians to remain in designated shelter areas. At 16, Sarah wasn't supposed to be in her mother's lab. Dr. Chen was off-world at a xenobiology conference, leaving strict instructions for her daughter to stay with the colony's education group. But Sarah had inherited more than just her mother's sharp features and analytical mind. She had her stubbornness too. The biological signature had appeared exactly where she'd been tracking an unusual energy pattern for the past 3 weeks. She'd kept her observations secret, knowing the colony's military arm would lock down the area if they knew. Their approach to anything unknown was always the same: contain, study, and if necessary, destroy. Sarah's fingers flew across the laboratory's holographic interface, downloading her research data to her personal device. The storm would hit in less than 30 minutes, and Sector 7 would be directly in its path. Whatever was out there wouldn't survive without help. Security override Chen Alpha 9. She whispered to the lab's computer. Disable tracking on Environmental Suit 7. Her mother would ground her for life if she survived this. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was important. The suit's systems came online with a soft hum, its adaptive camouflage already adjusting to match the reddish soil of their alien home. The journey to Sector 7 was a blur of careful navigation between security drones and automated defense turrets. The colony had gotten paranoid after the Proxima incident, where an entire research station had disappeared overnight. Sarah had read the classified files, another of her mother's security codes put to questionable use, and knew there was more to the story than the official version. She reached the energy signature's location just as the first plasma droplets began to fall, sizzling against her suit's shields. The readings led her to a cave entrance, partially hidden by crystalline formations that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. And there, curled in the shadow of the crystals, was something that defied everything she thought she knew about alien life. It looked almost like a coral formation at first, a complex lattice of interconnected strands that shifted colors in a hypnotic pattern. But as Sarah approached, careful to maintain her suit's integrity, she saw that the strands were moving, reorganizing themselves as if searching for something. The entity, she couldn't think of a better word for it, was injured. Parts of its structure were fragmented, leaking a luminescent fluid that evaporated instantly in the increasingly hostile atmosphere. Sarah's suit sensors screamed warnings about the approaching storm, but she couldn't leave. The entity had responded to her presence, its colors shifting to match her suit's camouflage pattern. This wasn't just mimicry, it was communication. "I want to help," she said aloud, knowing the entity couldn't possibly understand human speech. But to her amazement, the crystalline structure pulsed in response, its colors aligning in a pattern that reminded her of neural networks. The decision she made next would change everything, not just for her, but for human-alien relations across known space. With the storm bearing down and colony security undoubtedly tracking the unknown signature, Sarah did the one thing every protocol, every rule, and every survival instinct warned against. She reached out and touched it. The connection was instant and overwhelming. Images, emotions, and concepts flooded her mind. A vast network of intelligent crystalline beings, a culture built on the sharing of knowledge and experience, and an impossible journey across the stars. The entity was young, separated from its collective during an exploration mission. And now it was dying, its neural pathways failing without the support of its kind. Sarah's medical knowledge was limited to basic first aid and what she'd absorbed from her mother's research, but the entity was sharing more than just its story. It was showing her how to help, guiding her hands as she carefully gathered its fragmented pieces. The plasma storm was almost upon them when Sarah finished securing the entity in a modified sample container. Her suit's shields were at critical levels, the outer layer already beginning to bubble from the heat. But as she ran for the relative safety of the research station, the entity's presence in her mind was like a cool stream of clear thought, helping her navigate the increasingly dangerous terrain. They reached the station just as the storm hit in full force. Sarah sealed them inside her mother's lab, her hands shaking as she connected the sample container to a power source. The entity's colors had stabilized, its structure slowly repairing itself using the energy she provided. As she watched it heal, Sarah realized she'd just initiated first contact with an entirely new form of alien intelligence and broken about 50 colony regulations in the process. But the presence in her mind radiated something that transcended language: gratitude, curiosity, and a sense of possibility that made her smile despite the danger they were both in. The storm raged outside, but in that quiet lab, something unprecedented was taking shape, a bridge between two fundamentally different forms of life, built on nothing more than compassion and the simple desire to help. Sarah didn't know what would happen when the storm cleared, or how she would explain any of this to her mother or the colony authorities. But she knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that she'd made the right choice. The entity pulsed softly in its container, its colors now matching the rhythm of her heartbeat. And in that moment, Sarah understood that she wasn't just observing history, she was helping to write it, one defied protocol at a time. The morning after the plasma storm, Sarah woke to an awareness that wasn't her own. The crystalline entity's consciousness brushed against her thoughts like wind through leaves, sharing impressions of a world so vast and interconnected that it made her dizzy. She'd managed to hide it in her mother's secure specimen vault, but that was only a temporary solution. Colony security teams were everywhere, their sensors sweeping for traces of the anomalous signature they'd detected before the storm. Through the entity's enhanced perception, Sarah could sense their search patterns, feel the vibrations of their equipment through the station's foundations. The entity, which she'd started thinking of as Prism, was helping her stay one step ahead. Sarah sat at her mother's lab terminal, fingers hovering over the holographic keys. Prism's presence in her mind had grown stronger overnight, and with it came understanding. The crystalline being wasn't just intelligent. It was part of a vast, collective consciousness that spanned galaxies. But unlike the hostile hive minds from colony horror stories, Prism's people valued individual growth and discovery. Their neural networks were about sharing knowledge, not enforcing conformity. "They're going to find us eventually," Sarah murmured, knowing Prism could understand her now. The neural bridge between them translated concepts rather than words, making language barriers irrelevant. Through their connection, she felt Prism's agreement, tinged with concern not for itself, but for her. The lab's security system chimed, warning of approaching personnel. Sarah quickly activated the specimen vault's camouflage protocols, another of her mother's security features she wasn't supposed to know about. Through Prism's senses, she could feel 3 people approaching: 2 security officers and Dr. Marcus Webb, the colony's head of xenobiology. "Miss Chen," Dr. Webb's voice carried through the lab's intercom. "We need to discuss last night's incident." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling Prism's reassuring presence. The entity had shown her how its people handled deception, not through lies, but through careful presentation of partial truths. "Coming, Dr. Webb," she called, quickly checking that her neural dampers were in place. The small devices, disguised as standard medical monitors, helped mask the unusual brain activity caused by her connection with Prism. The lab door slid open to reveal Dr. Webb's tall figure, flanked by security. His artificial eyes scanned the room, their metallic irises adjusting with quiet clicks. "Your mother's research station recorded some unusual energy signatures during the storm," he said without preamble. Care to explain why you were here instead of in the education center? Sarah felt Prism's thoughts align with hers, helping her stay calm. I was monitoring Mom's long-term experiments, she said. The storm's electromagnetic interference can damage sensitive equipment if the buffers aren't adjusted properly. It wasn't entirely a lie. She had adjusted the buffers after bringing Prism inside. The entity's crystalline structure would have registered as equipment rather than life on standard scans, thanks to their hasty modifications to the lab's sensors. Dr. Webb's artificial eyes narrowed. Your mother's security codes were used to disable tracking on an environmental suit. Mom gave me emergency access, Sarah said, meeting his gaze. Through Prism, she could sense the subtle electromagnetic fields generated by his cybernetic implants. The entity was fascinated by human technology, especially the way organic and artificial systems interacted. The suit's systems were glitching. I had to reset them manually. The security officers exchanged glances, but Dr. Webb held up a hand to stop their questions. Sarah, I knew your father before the Proxima incident. He was a good man and a terrible liar, just like you. His tone softened slightly. If you found something out there, something you think needs to be protected, you should know that the colony's regulations exist for good reasons. Sarah felt Prism's consciousness stir with interest at the mention of her father. The entity had been exploring her memories while she slept, trying to understand human relationships and social structures. It found the concept of family particularly compelling, so different from its own collective, yet serving a similar purpose of support and growth. I know about Proxima, Sarah said carefully, feeling Prism's guidance in choosing her words. I know what really happened there wasn't what's in the official reports. Dr. Webb's artificial eyes wavered as they focused on her face. Those files are classified. The truth is classified too, isn't it? Sarah pressed, drawing on Prism's courage. About how first contact actually went, about the opportunities we missed because of fear. The security officers shifted uncomfortably, but Dr. Webb remained still. After a long moment, he dismissed them with a gesture. Once they were alone, he spoke quietly. What exactly did you find in Sector 7? Sarah felt Prism's presence strengthen, supporting her decision. The entity had shown her its memories of other contacts, other worlds where trust had bridged the gap between different forms of life. Something that could change everything, she said. But I need your word that you'll listen, really listen, before making any decisions. Dr. Webb studied her for what felt like ages. Finally, he reached up and did something she'd never seen before. He deactivated his artificial eyes. The metallic irises went dark, leaving only human tissue beneath. Your father said almost exactly the same thing the day before he disappeared. He sat heavily in a nearby chair. Tell me everything. Through their neural bridge, Prism shared Sarah's mix of hope and apprehension. The entity understood that this moment was crucial, not just for their immediate survival, but for the future of human-alien relations. It began sharing images and concepts with Sarah, helping her find the right way to explain its nature and purpose. As Sarah began to speak, she felt something shift in the air between them. Dr. Webb might have come looking for a security breach, but what he was about to discover was something far more important. Proof that humanity's future among the stars didn't have to be defined by fear and isolation. Prism's consciousness wrapped around her own like a protective embrace as she started her explanation. Together, they would show Dr. Webb, and eventually the entire colony, that the greatest discoveries often came not from careful protocols, but from the simple human instinct to reach out and help someone in need. Dr. Webb's revelation came at dawn, as the binary suns of Kepler 186 F painted the colony's protective dome in shades of amber and rose. Your father found something before he disappeared, he told Sarah, his deactivated artificial eyes giving his face an unusually vulnerable look, something he thought would change everything. Now I'm starting to understand what it might have been. Sarah felt Prism's consciousness stir with interest, its crystalline structure pulsing with subtle patterns of light in its containment unit. Through their neural bridge, she sensed not just curiosity but recognition. The entity had been trying to share something with her about this place, about its history, but the concepts were so vast and alien that she'd struggle to understand. There's a network of caves beneath the colony, Dr. Webb continued, pulling up ancient geological surveys on the lab's holographic display. Your father's last transmissions came from somewhere in this region, but the mineral composition makes detailed scanning impossible. The military wrote it off as equipment failure before declaring him lost. Prism's thoughts merged with Sarah's, and suddenly she understood. It's not interference, she said, watching the crystalline patterns of her friend shift and dance. The caves themselves are artificial. They're trying to hide something. Dr. Webb nodded slowly. We need to move your friends somewhere safer. Security sweeps are getting more frequent, and I can only misdirect them for so long. Whatever your father found down there might be our best chance. The journey to the cave network was tense. They moved under cover of a minor dust storm, Dr. Webb's security clearance getting them past the perimeter sensors. Sarah carried Prism in a modified research container, the entity's consciousness a steady presence in her mind, helping her navigate the treacherous terrain through its enhanced perception of electromagnetic fields. The cave entrance looked natural enough, just another fissure in the planet's rust-colored rock. But as they ventured deeper, Sarah began to notice subtle patterns in the wall formations, too regular to be natural. Prism's excitement grew with each step, its crystalline structure resonating with something in their surroundings. Look at this, Dr. Webb breathed, running his hand along a seemingly smooth wall. Under his touch, lines of light began to spread, forming intricate patterns that reminded Sarah of circuit boards. The whole cave system is one giant crystalline computer. Through their neural bridge, Prism shared a flood of information that made Sarah gasp. This was built by your people, she said aloud, translating for Dr. Webb. Thousands of years ago, this was a waypoint, a place where your collective could connect with other species. The deeper they went, the more the caves came alive with light and color. Ancient crystalline formations began to pulse in harmony with Prism, creating a display that took Sarah's breath away. But it wasn't just beautiful, it was a language, a record of everything that had happened here. They found the central chamber nearly a kilometer underground. The space was vast, its walls lined with crystalline structures that made Prism's containment unit seem tiny in comparison. And there, suspended in a field of energy at the chamber's heart, was something that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. Her father's research tablet. He found it, Dr. Webb whispered. He actually found it. Sarah approached the tablet with trembling hands. The device shouldn't have been functional after 2 years, but as she drew closer, she understood. The crystalline structures had preserved it, kept it powered and protected. When she touched it, the screen came to life, revealing her father's last log entry. The crystals aren't just a different form of life. Her father's recorded voice filled the chamber. They're a bridge between species, a way to share knowledge and experience across the gulf of biology. The collective didn't abandon this place. They're waiting for us to be ready. Through Prism, Sarah felt a surge of joy and validation. The entity's people hadn't just visited this world. They had prepared it, created this sanctuary for the moment when humanity would be ready to join a larger community of intelligent life. Her father hadn't been lost. He'd been chosen as the first contact. But the log continued, and her father's voice grew urgent. There are those who want to weaponize this technology, to use the crystal's ability to bridge consciousness as a tool for control. They're coming. I've sealed the chamber, hidden the entrance. When the right person finds this place, they'll know what to do. Sarah felt Prism's consciousness expand, connecting not just with her mind, but with the ancient crystal network around them. Through their shared perception, she began to understand the true scope of what they'd discovered. This wasn't just a record of past contact, it was a key to humanity's future among the stars. Dr. Webb was examining the chamber's crystalline walls with his restored artificial eyes, his expression a mix of awe and concern. "The military will never let this stay hidden," he said quietly. "Once they understand what it can do, they don't have to find out yet," Sarah replied, feeling Prism's agreement. The entity was already teaching her how to interface with the ancient systems, showing her how to mask their energy signatures from colonial sensors. "This place has stayed hidden for thousands of years. It can stay hidden a little longer, until we can prove there's a better way." Through their neural bridge, Prism shared images of other worlds where similar sanctuaries had helped bridge the gap between different species. This chamber wasn't just a refuge, it was a classroom, a place where humanity could learn to overcome its fears and reach its full potential. As if in response to her thoughts, the crystalline walls pulsed with new patterns of light, revealing star maps and records of countless civilizations that had passed through this place. Sarah felt her father's presence in every discovery, in every piece of data he'd carefully documented before disappearing. He's still out there, she realized, the truth coming to her through Prism's vast network of knowledge. The collective didn't just teach him, they took him to see everything he'd discovered. He's coming back. But first, we have to show them that we're ready for what comes next. Dr. Webb placed a hand on her shoulder, his artificial eyes recording everything. "Then we'd better get started," he said. "Your father always said the hardest part of any discovery was convincing people to see past their fears." Sarah nodded, feeling Prism's warmth in her mind as the ancient chamber hummed with possibility around them. They had found more than just a sanctuary. They had found hope, hidden in the crystalline heart of an alien world. Now they just had to keep it safe long enough to change the future. The first cases appeared 3 days after Sarah and Dr. Webb discovered the underground sanctuary. Colonial medical staff called it stellar fever, a ruthlessly efficient virus that attacked the nervous system, overwhelming the body's electrical impulses until vital systems simply shut down. Through her neural link with Prism, Sarah felt the colony's growing fear like a physical weight. 14 new cases today, Dr. Webb reported, his artificial eyes projecting casualty statistics across the lab's main display. "The quarantine isn't working. Whatever this is, it's adapting faster than our containment protocols." Sarah watched the crystalline patterns of Prism's structure shift and pulse as the entity processed the information. Through their connection, she sensed not just concern, but recognition. The collective had seen this before, on other worlds where rapidly advancing technology collided with unprepared biology. "It's not just a virus, is it?" Sarah asked, translating Prism's complex thoughts into words. "It's a side effect of our presence here. The planet's responding to us." Dr. Webb's expression tightened. "The military's demanding access to all xenobiology research. They think this might be a weapon, something left behind by whoever built those ruins." He paused, artificial eyes whirring as they focused on Prism. "They're not entirely wrong, are they?" Sarah felt Prism's sadness ripple through their neural bridge. The entity shared images of other colonies on other worlds, of civilizations that had faced similar trials. This wasn't an attack, it was a test. The crystalline collective had learned long ago that not every species was ready for the knowledge they offered. "The ruins contain the cure," Sarah said slowly, understanding flowing through her link with Prism. "The same technology that lets the crystals bridge different forms of consciousness could help our immune systems adapt. But if we reveal that, we expose everything," Dr. Webb finished. "The sanctuary, the collective, your father's research. And there's no guarantee the military would use that knowledge the way it was intended." The lab's emergency channels crackled with another update. 6 more cases, too critical. Sarah felt the weight of every number, every life hanging in the balance. Through Prism, she could sense the subtle changes in the colony's electromagnetic field as more systems were diverted to medical support. "There's something else," Dr. Webb said quietly. "Your mother's ship is on its way back. She's heard about the outbreak and pulled every string she could to return early. Sarah, if she finds out what we've been hiding..." Sarah's hand went to the neural dampers that helped hide her connection with Prism. Her mother was brilliant, possibly the most qualified xenobiologist in the colony. She would see through their deceptions in seconds, but maybe that wasn't a bad thing. We need her, Sarah realized, feeling Prism's agreement. Not just her expertise, we need her reputation, her influence. If we're going to convince people there's a better way than fear, we need someone they trust. Dr. Webb began to respond, but an alarm cut him off. The lab's systems were detecting a critical failure in the medical center's quarantine field. If it collapsed, there would be nothing stopping the virus from spreading through the entire colony. Sarah felt Prism's consciousness surge with determination. The entity had been holding back, careful not to overwhelm her human mind with too much information. But now it shared everything. The full complexity of the crystalline technology, the true purpose of the tests that every potential partner species faced, and most importantly, how to use it all. "Get my mother's ship cleared for emergency landing," Sarah said, her voice steady as Prism's knowledge flowed through her. "And I need access to the colony's main neural network." "Sarah, if you interface with the network in your condition..." "The neural dampers were never about protecting me," she interrupted. "They were about protecting everyone else. What Prism and I can do together, it's what my father was trying to tell us. The crystals don't just bridge consciousness, they evolve it, make it stronger." Through their connection, Prism showed her what needed to be done. The entity's people had developed their collective consciousness over millions of years, learning to share knowledge and experience without losing individuality. Now they sought others who could do the same, species ready to join a community that spanned galaxies. "Your father believed humanity was ready," Dr. Webb said softly, "ready to be more than what we are now." Sarah nodded, feeling Prism's strength flow through her as she removed the neural dampers. He was right. But change doesn't come without risk. She turned to the lab's main console, her fingers moving across the holographic controls as Prism guided her. "The colony has a choice to make. Let's hope they make the right one." Around them, the lab's systems began to pulse with crystalline light as two very different forms of technology merged. Through their shared consciousness, Sarah and Prism began the delicate work of bridging not just their own minds, but the gap between two civilizations. The colony's choice, and humanity's future, would depend on what happened next. As Sarah's mother's ship broke atmosphere and the quarantine alarms continued to blare, she felt Prism's unwavering support. Together, they would show everyone that the greatest breakthroughs came not from fear or force, but from trust and understanding, even if it meant risking everything they had to protect. Dr. Isabella Chen's research vessel landed as the second sun set, casting long shadows across the colony's quarantine zone. Sarah watched from the lab's observation window, Prism's consciousness intertwined with her own as they prepared for what came next. Through their shared perception, she could feel her mother's ship humming with energy, its systems integrating with the colony's network. "Security teams are moving to intercept her," Dr. Webb reported, his artificial eyes tracking multiple feeds. "But they're spread thin dealing with the outbreak. We have maybe 10 minutes before." The lab door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing Dr. Isabella Chen. She stood in the doorway, still in her flight suit, her expression unreadable. "I leave for 3 months," she said quietly. "And you managed to initiate first contact, find your father's secret research, and trigger a planetary immune response." A faint smile crossed her face. "You really are David's daughter." Sarah felt Prism's surprise mirror her own. Through their neural bridge, the entity shared her mother's electromagnetic signature. It was familiar, not just from Sarah's memories, but from the ancient records in the sanctuary. Isabella Chen had been there before. "You knew," Sarah breathed, "about the ruins, about what Dad found. You've known all along." "I knew enough to understand why your father had to disappear." Isabella stepped into the lab, her movements precise and deliberate. "The collective doesn't just test potential partner species, Sarah. They test individuals, families, generations. They watch how we handle knowledge, how we choose to use it." Through Prism, Sarah suddenly understood. The collective hadn't just chosen her father. They had been watching her entire family, studying how humans pass down not just genetics but wisdom and values. Her mother's research, her father's discovery, her own choice to help Prism. None of it was coincidence. A medical alert blared through the colony speakers. The quarantine field was failing. They had minutes, maybe less, before the virus broke containment. Sarah felt Prism's urgency, its desire to help tempered by ancient protocols that demanded certainty before intervention. The crystal technology can save them, Sarah said, looking at her mother. But they have to choose it, have to understand what it means. Isabella nodded, moving to the lab's main console. Then let's show them. All of them. Her fingers flew across the controls, overriding security protocols with clearance codes Sarah had never seen before. The collective has been waiting for humanity to prove something, Sarah. Not just that we're intelligent or technologically advanced, but that we can grow beyond our fears. The lab's screens came alive with data from the sanctuary, records of countless civilizations that had faced this moment. Some had chosen isolation, turning away from the stars in fear. Others had tried to weaponize the knowledge, destroying themselves in the process. But some, the ones who became part of something greater, had chosen a different path. Security teams are approaching the lab, Dr. Webb warned. Military command is demanding. The door slid open again, revealing Colonel Pierce and a squad of armed soldiers. The colonel's augmented combat systems hummed with barely contained energy, but he froze at the sight of Dr. Isabella Chen. "Doctor," he said stiffly, "this area is under quarantine. We have orders to secure all xenobiology research and terminate any unknown life forms." Isabella stepped forward, positioning herself between the soldiers and Sarah. "Your orders came from people who don't understand what's really happening here, Colonel, but I can show you." She pressed a final command into the console, and suddenly every screen in the colony lit up with the same image. The crystalline sanctuary, its ancient halls pulsing with light and knowledge. Through their neural link, Sarah felt Prism connect with the colony's network, sharing not just information but experience. The true history of humanity's place in the cosmos. "We're not alone out here," Isabella continued, her voice carrying through every speaker. "We never were, but the universe isn't divided into allies and enemies. It's filled with potential partners, waiting to see if we're ready to join them." The colonel's augmented systems whirred as he processed the flood of data. "The virus is already changing," Sarah finished, feeling Prism's guidance. "Look at your medical scans. Really look." The latest readings showed something impossible. The virus wasn't attacking the nervous system. It was evolving it, preparing human biology for connection to something greater. Through Prism, Sarah could sense the subtle changes in every infected patient, the way their minds were becoming ready for contact with the collective. "Your father proved we could adapt," Isabella said softly. "Now it's time for everyone else to make the same choice he did." The colonel lowered his weapon slowly, his augmented eyes fixed on Prism's crystalline form. "How many?" he asked. "How many other species are out there, waiting?" Sarah felt Prism's joy as it shared the truth. Thousands of civilizations, each unique, each contributing to a network of knowledge and experience that spanned the galaxy. The collective wasn't an empire or a hierarchy. It was a community, growing stronger with each new perspective it embraced. Through their neural bridge, Sarah sensed something else. A familiar consciousness, reaching out from vast distances. Her father's mind touched hers briefly, changed but still recognizable, showing her glimpses of wonders she could barely comprehend. "He's coming home," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "They all are." The quarantine alarms fell silent as Prism's influence spread through the colony systems, guided by the combined knowledge of the Chen family. The virus wasn't ending. It was transforming, becoming a bridge between human consciousness and the vast network that waited among the stars. Colonel Pierce looked at his soldiers, then back at the images of the sanctuary. "What do we do now?" "We make a choice," Isabella answered, taking her daughter's hand. The same choice every species faces when they learn they're not alone. Do we hide in fear of what's different, or do we reach out and become something more? Sarah felt Prism's warmth in her mind as the entity shared one final truth. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't its technology or its intelligence. It was the ability to face the unknown with hope instead of fear, to see difference as an opportunity for growth rather than a threat. The colonel nodded slowly, then did something unprecedented. He removed his augmented combat systems, letting them power down. "Show us," he said simply. As Sarah, her mother, and Prism began to share their knowledge with the colony, the binary sons of Kepler 186f rose on a new era, not just for humanity, but for all species ready to join hands across the stars. The choice had been made. The future was waiting. And it was more beautiful than anyone could have imagined.